Now, we do have some big one picture, remember from the one?
Seems to be. I'll be back there in a second.
I went down to network connections and yes, somehow. Yeah, I did the last one.
I don't think I'd be able to see it like that, but someone when I saw it first, I'm like,
Brian, thanks for the information. So we have some.
After I sent the email back to the website, just to make sure that it changed and you were reciting newer information, but okay, so it didn't sound like stuff.
I think you're good. My surprise is that 316 is on first floor.
Yeah, I ended up on the ninth floor. I found the elevator. I got in, the door closed. I said, "What floor?" I said, "Third." You were just hungry. Didn't have to look very far.
Well, what are they responding to this?
What happened?
Still corrugated.
Yes, I think so. That's what I wanted to check real quick. I'm gonna, and then as long as that's working, I think you're fine.
Okay, so I'll probably need to. Is that probably in my notes somewhere? The word is.
Yeah, capital P, act. That says.
do you have a place that you're
R
finding
in.
this time?
Should I pass it around or maybe use it?
And it theoretically is
Is everybody
still
getting
going.
this time to arrive, or is it, you know?
There's only one other woman I'm aware of, but she comes back.
Because I think it's working. We'll check that one. Just make sure. And holler if something else happens.
Okay.
And it will shut down, go to that log out screen. And I think the one upstairs is doing the same thing, but it's recording.
Thank you so much. Pretty good drive.
Oh, Alex is here because I was on the building. He's on his way.
Are we here for a couple more minutes?
I think so. He's just right down the road. And
Yes.
I may ask you to do this, I can do that separately. So you did it.
Thank you. Thank you for the pens.
Whoever's just doing mine, it's a nice one.
Thank you.
Leslie. History teacher does that.
Very described.
Yes.
I didn't have to do it on AEGIN.
LWERY.
And your phone number?
417-532-9144.
Email.
K. Lowry at Lebanon.K12.mo.us.
Is the person we're missing Susan?
No, that's.
Oh, you're Susan. Oh, okay, Suzanne. Okay. I got to be on Susan.
It's just not.
Okay.
Been busy this one?
506. 838.
I thought like it's we were talking about
Is Suzanne?
we were talking about would we like trade do summer on either end or we're in a week on fall break and like always right now as smooth as I can on next week. The weather stuff.
Oh, I see your shirt. Yeah,
I don't know.
it's in Summit. Okay, so it's.
Oh, I guess I like to.
Yeah.
Yeah, we used to K-12, which is nice because I know we usually like sometimes.
It's just our fall break is what it's so nice.
I mean, it's not.
This is our fall break.
It's a good time to, be, like, that's, they want to transition to campus.
I chose my big surprise to take my mind.
Exactly.
Well, conversation is everywhere.
It's true.
I agree with that.
I don't like to see here, it's very hard to hear in here, it's a horrible echo. So, I don't care if this where we might think about that, it's just terrible.
Yeah.
And I think we have to,
Yes.
Yeah.
maybe make sure everyone, knows that we want to maybe review like the meetings or something.
And we had, I had lots of different notes and letters.
Yeah.
You might as well start with, like, sort of introducing yourselves and our members, and then maybe go to, I think we're sort of talking about reviewing, our notes, things that been shared out publicly, and notes from last week, so.
Did you have, Mary, did you know the name of the person who said?
Leslie.
Leslie.
You want to start with introductions? Julie, you want to start? Sure, this is just maybe some personal things to help us get to know each other.
Some of us know each other, some of us don't, so thanks for joining us this morning. I'm Julie Thomas, I'm a parent, and I'm from Lake View Ozarks.
So I get to sit down the whole time. Van Harvey, St. Charles, I'm a parent. I've got kids in the Francis Health School District for the last 20 years. And very interested in what we're doing here.
I'm Alex Quinn, assistant professor of social studies education at St. Louis University. And my book comes from the Commission on Higher Education. I'm Brian Schultz. I work in independent school districts. My title is instructional specialist, but basically what I do is I work with the middle school and high school teachers in the school districts, teaching social studies. And we are constantly trying to improve our practice to make history relevant to some of the students. So that's developing classes and helping that out. So previously I taught 12 years in the school district. Christmas used to be a high school education.
I'm Jamie Maker. I'm a social studies teacher at Robinson High School, just outside of St. Louis. I'm the 2014 Missouri State Teacher of the Year.
And I'm proud to work with you.
Follow that.
I'm Jessica Beal. I work in the Rapid School District also, and I'm in Christie Middle School. And have some background in standards development at the national level and curriculum work at the district level and state level.
And I'm Suzanne Mitchell, I'm from the Summit School District just outside of Kansas City. I've been teaching since operating as an office and nationally certified in social studies in the 2010 Missouri Teacher of the Year. So you're looking.
They're great friends.
Lisa.
Wendy Rogers, and I'm married parent appointee, next to his office. And I'm homeschooled and taught Christian school, bachelor of science degree, and just care about education. I'm glad to be here. I'm
Morning.
from Lake Ozarks area. I didn't even say that.
Thanks for letting me join. I'm Larry Gregg. I'm chair of history of political science at Missouri University of Science and Technology, and I've taught there since Jimmy Carter. I spent 38 years at Missouri S&T and haven't worked for another job since 1977. Because you get really good students. I was talking about a great student from Lebanon that we had. It's a great place to teach because we get so many good students.
I'm Kevin Lowry, the high school principal in Lebanon. We're a high school of about 1,500 kids. This is my 27th year in education. I had a stint at Hollenbeck Middle School for 3 years, a long time ago, and as long as we're throwing around credentials, I'm the 2005 Milken National Educator of Missouri.
I'm Dr. Mary Hearn. I am semi-retired. I teach a course on how to align instruction to standards. When I was president of the council, or the division of children with communication science and disorders in the Council for Exceptional Children, it was during my tenure we wrote the standards for teacher certification and teachers of the deaf. And as a teacher of children with disabilities, I had K-12 certification, so in my 10 years of teaching in public school, I did teach history, as well as the other subject areas. I became active in this issue in 2013 and drafted the original bill that was put through the House and the Senate. So I say that I live and breathe government and civics. That wasn't on my agenda, like I said, but I love education. I love the children I teach, and I love this country. So I think this is the pulse of public education, where we teach children what their rights are. And I think this is the safety of it.
Speaking of Lebanon, I'm Easter. My grandmother was Jewish.
Oh, is that right? Wow, it's a small world in here, isn't it?
I didn't love that.
Did you say we're throwing around credentials?
I got to meet mom.
Do you act like I'm ready to?
Not
Oh,
wrong.
Do you have some of those communications, that, on computer that you wanna
Oh,
share out?
do we want to go ahead and email? Okay. What all, did everybody else receive? Let's see, the letters that, we just kind of went through. I had, the template for us to report to the Speaker of the House, and the template of the Senate, and, something, did you guys get that? It was, 11 points for us to answer.
We did not.
I did not get last.
By the way, I'm new and I have no context in particular, other than what I've read, so
Oh, maybe.
I may ask a lot of questions.
I have a hard copy of that template, and we need to get copies.
Okay.
So maybe just for our new members, in general, the work that we do is it's autonomous of this group. The couple of requirements is that we are supposed to update, both houses of the General Assembly with our work, and so there's a template, to do that with a form that we created. Aside from that, there are some public hearings that the State Board of Education will hold, and so those notices go out as when you have. And then our deadline for creating our recommendation that will go before the State Board is roughly a year from now, so it's October of 2015. And so, the template that they're talking about is just for our reporting progress.
Okay.
A lot of groups have met twice now. This is our second meeting. We didn't meet the last time. The other groups met, we had several members, that couldn't come. And then we also, it was a real tight turnaround, like 2 weeks, and a lot of us said it was gonna be really hard to get back up here. So this is, you only miss one meeting. I know some other groups have already met twice.
And we didn't accomplish a whole lot because there was still quite a bit of confusion going on.
And that's all clarified now.
Well, there was another session that needed to apologize because there was quite a bit of disorganization as far as information, because there were different people appointing, so we had
Okay.
from the speaker, governor, so we were all a little discombobulated.
Oh, thank you.
So we spent the first day kind of reading over the new legislation that essentially is replacing the, I don't want to say replacing, but for lack of a better word, at the present time, why we're having user and learning standards to replace Common Core standards. Effectively, that's what the point of the bill was. People in the state of Missouri were overwhelmingly in favor of saying we want to control what happens in our schools, and to protect that liberty. Anytime you have centralized control, you end up in somewhat of a, problem. And as a parent, public school controls my whole world. And I did not appreciate being pushed out of the process of that discussion at all. It tells me what time I get up in the morning, it tells me what time and so we just, as Missourians, we have rights and we need to maintain control.
Can I ask for a point of clarification too? Are we following Robert's Rules of Order? Are we following what's our procedure to make sure that I'm going through? And that all ideas come forward?
I'm looking at our meeting notes from our first meeting, which does state that we would follow Robert's Rules of Order. And maybe since we don't have a chairperson, either Wendy should be like going over minutes that were actually documented and posted for public view. And then we probably should choose a chairperson pretty quickly so that we can get the work moving and stay on topic. The second meeting that do you want to do, how do you want to do that? And I think you have meeting minutes, I don't know that everybody has them, and so you have your emails, but from the first day and the second day, and then the plenary meeting, you also took notes, took notes for the group, because not everybody could attend because of the short notice that was given. I just think that would be good to have, or at least to review.
So was the last meeting pretty much just an overview?
Well, did
Was
everybody
anything
get a
accomplished?
copy of the loan?
Yes, yeah.
It would probably be wise for you, if you've gone through that, and when you do go through questions, because we did go over that as a group and discuss that. So then at some point, we could help clarify the things that we talked about within that law. Some of it is, one of the things that was mentioned in our meetings was that in brackets on that law, those things are actually removed. I didn't know if you were aware of that, I was not when we first went through. So that does help if something's confusing, you might find that it's in a bracket, so it's actually not even part of it, so. Okay, 922 is our first one. Okay. Introduction of group members. We agreed upon the Robert's Rules of Meeting. We reviewed the law House bill, which is HB1490. Let's see. We reviewed, modified, and developed, keep in mind, problem solving, analytical ability, evaluation, creativity, application, performance-based standards. Encompasses all students. Frameworks, structure, tool for implementing recommendations and possibilities. There was discussion of which was standards and which was frameworks. Does everybody feel like that got resolved? Okay. Anybody have questions on that?
No, but I just want to clarify that, as I understand it, the original Show Me standards are still in place, is that correct? The original content process standards?
The blue, are you
Yes,
talking
the
blue
blue
placement stays, as I understand it, blue placement does not get touched. That's not what we're doing.
Well, I think we need to take that up,
Okay.
because there's misinformation on it.
Okay.
With regard to social studies. So, in essence, the structure remains the same in terms of the number of standards, and the content of the standards.
The original
In terms-
standards.
In terms of the statements.
Yeah.
But underneath that, I think the discussion is great as to how we could reorganize. Are you listening?
Yes.
Oh, there she is.
Yes. The sign-in list is from.
In terms of how to reorganize content, under those standards to promote connectedness of the information and developmental appropriateness. That was a large part of our discussion.
Kevin, with all due respect, I know we all have a lot of questions still, but I really think that we either need to move forward to actually elect a chairperson. We can kind of guide through some of the questions in the work and the comments so that we don't spend much of the day. The first 2 days, we spent a lot of the days trying to work through questions and not really being able to orderly function. And so I think it's very, very important. And you wouldn't know that, you weren't here those first 2 days. And I think we have to take the time to address people who just come in and get everybody caught up. But I think we need a system of order to do that.
Yeah, I agree.
So I would like to make a motion, although I know you were trying to wait for the minute, but it seems like we keep getting into conversations that we go ahead and think about nominating a chairperson to structure and move forward with an orderly meeting.
Would you like to meet Leslie first?
First, let's introduce.
Hi,
Hello.
I'm Leslie Hubert. Do you want to come from?
Yeah, we want to know all about you.
I reside in Mesa, Missouri, and currently an adjunct professor for National University and a preschool teacher. But I taught 8 years high school district and worked with several different school districts here in Missouri and Virginia.
Who appointed you?
I'm sorry, I went through Mary Garland and the Lieutenant Governor's office.
Thank you.
Since we're following Robert's Rules of Order, do we feel a second on just this recommendation being able to chair?
Sure.
We need someone to say all in favor.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Opposed?
Van, you want to be chair?
That's nice, Chair. Are you nominating?
I'm nominating. I nominate Brian Schultz.
Second.
Can we have more than one nominating the parents?
Julie.
Parents, to be the parents, I guess.
We're supposed to have 4 parents on this board. How many do we have here? 3? I'm a parent, maybe
That
you're
are
one.
as parents. Or
So who are we missing as a parent? Because we're supposed to have 4.
Wendy's a parent.
Yes, Wendy, Julie, May, that's 3.
And the lady just mentioned,
I'm a teacher, but technically I'm not teaching high school right now, so I guess I could count.
Are you?
Well,
Okay,
but
no, you're assigned under a category.
in what category were you, because 8 years of social studies doesn't meet the criteria.
It's 10 years in the subject area, so it could include university teachers.
I don't know that that says that on the,
Well, in particular, that was the intent, not just the intent, there's a reason it doesn't require 10 years in K-12. And that is so that university faculty could participate. And in particular, that was a concern in math.
Are there more discussion on nominations?
I move that nomination cease.
thank you.
All in favor?
Aye. Any opposed?
Okay, so, you're gonna do a paper with that, how do we do that? Do a paper, right? So the 2 nominees are Anne and Brian.
Brian, what's your role again? I'm sorry.
I'm a professional, for the rest of
Excuse me. And when we do now, that's on calendar.
I use my list to get the.
Love to be here.
You want to hear?
Just talk with that.
Okay, our new chairman is Brian.
Say what you want.
Yeah.
We're making a record here, 2 of them.
Yeah, over 2 chairs.
Yeah.
I didn't know that was so complicated.
Being a chair.
I was like, you know.
Stay
Nobody
in
was
the
saying
chair.
anything, so I like came in about it. Nobody wanted to do it.
I had to rework, because I think I read it on the sunshine law, that record, there was those, according to the sunshine law, had to be taken, so you might want to make sure that you did that.
Congratulations, Brian.
When you do a sash and a crown.
Who's the better chair? Alright, but did you bring a projector? think Wendy, you're able to, well, have you guys received an email from the working group? Wendy, would you be able to send your minutes from the 22nd, 23rd to Leslie?
Yes, and Leslie, I don't have Leslie contact information.
So do you want me to plenary minutes as well? The plenary minutes as well, maybe?
Plenary minutes as well, I think plenary minutes. However confusing the plenary section was. It's sort of like, oh, I'm still just confused as I was.
Isn't that the case? I know, but I tried, did you get some of the stuff that has the answers that you're going in?
So, I'm trying to find it.
Do you want me to continue?
Yes, go ahead. Are you on the 22nd minutes?
I'm on the 22nd. We talked about standards and framework and discussing it, which is one of the things that came up in that, meeting that I sent you minutes on, and the clarification, and it was stated as framework and standards. The framework was something that existed separate within this bill that was really referring to as what we're supposed to be working on is the standards, and then the subgroups underneath, yes, it's still our responsibility, not just the heading, but when you look at it's a great level of expectations, it's pretty much, we fill in all those blanks, not just the heading process. Curriculum was implemented in the districts, so it's not ours to facilitate or change. We talked about Outstanding School Act of 1993, there were 75 standards that should stay in place. We were gonna gather resources to review. Somebody mentioned Terrace Moore, story killers.
Torrance, or is it Terrence? I did it wrong every
I
time.
wrote
My niece
that.
is Florence, and so I'm not Terrence.
Did you bring them?
I did not bring that.
You did not?
No, that was a lecture that I heard.
I see. We talked about Larry Krieger, excuse me, is that something still?
Well, we should consider it, right? It should affect the AP US history.
It's the what?
AP US history, English,
Okay.
and he and president of university professional organization, and written critiques of English.
C3 frameworks, socialstudies.org. You can reference those on there, is that accurate? Do we have copies? Do you have copies? Does anybody want a copy of that now? Okay, get to that. State standards 2007, is that?
We asked those.
Was that the CAI we're talking about, 6 years curriculum line?
Is
Do
GLC
you listen to them?
That is the current state curriculum that we reviewed last time we started to look at working.
Which is GLE, right?
The GLEs were, yeah.
Or secondary?
Yes, okay. Benchmark state standards for social studies, we were visited by Todd Scott, Senator Tom Dempsey's office, from the state capitol, room 326. He basically said if we have a quorum, we're supposed to continue our process. He did mention that we could be potentially reimbursed for our mileage, so we should keep track of our expenses. We're hoping that as the many companies, in fact, nobody's officially made a statement that I know of, but you guys heard of anything official? Said there was no plan B, we must be successful. So we've been charged with a big responsibility. Suggested that we remember the sunshine law. There was and when I send you guys the information, there'll be a link to the sunshine law rules, just to refresh. We elected the chair and the secretary, and the chair has resigned, and Diana is still presiding secretary. Requested Desi make copies of the curriculum alignment the outline of information prepared by Desi. She went through it quickly. It was mentioned that Desi note tape will be available for 9/23 meeting as well. Future meeting dates were currently set as October the 2nd and 3rd, and we opted not to. And then October 20th and 21st, which we are the agenda at that time for 9/23, review current standards, discussion of our standards, National Council of Social Studies recently released. 2, identify additional standards for review. Massachusetts standards was one that was highly recommended. Does everybody have a copy of those? Did we get copies of those?
We provided, well, we brought parts of state standards from different states to look at how they treat social studies differently than Missouri does. And so I printed off, not all of Missouri, it was pretty, Massachusetts is pretty big, but there's a copy for everybody to look at.
It's like 140-some pages.
Yeah, that's prohibitive.
Yeah.
I have a little bit of New York. We also have part of Ohio and part of
I have all of them.
California. Okay, Ohio and California. So we have different states to look at, just structure, so we can provide those things.
Jessica mentioned North Carolina.
Well, we looked at that online. Steve was not for that, is what I remember from that. He said, no, that wouldn't work. And I didn't understand why, but that's what I remember. Mr. Pryor saying it.
I'll get to that in a second, but we liked the way it was laid out, not necessarily the content.
Right.
We liked the way it was constructed on the page that we read it, so it was more user-friendly. I believe the group agreed upon as being when we finished. You don't remember
I
that?
don't remember that.
Oh,
I don't remember North Carolina.
Okay, Jessica and I.
So we'll get. Okay.
So we did try to follow up by bringing some samples of the group. Are there any questions from our new folks or clarifications regarding our minutes from the first day?
May I ask a question while we're at this point? Developed a tentative plan to meet with the K through 6, which you guys did end up doing that. I wasn't able to attend that. Is there a plan to?
I'd be happy to report out on that meeting as well as Larry's also visited with that case or status. Mr. Bird and that team, I'd be happy to report out on that after we have this part.
Do we need to approve minutes or do we need to vote?
Which day was it that we addressed?
We don't, well, there's 9/23, that was 9/23.
Here, just sort of approved, go through both days, just make sure we're clear.
A point of information, I think we decided on November 10th and December 1st as future meeting dates as well. We discussed.
I think it's on our minutes.
Is it on the next day?
That's the next day.
Okay, I apologize. That's all right, so then I want to make sure we make note of it in our minutes. Yes. On 9/23, at the convening of the meeting, we pray to begin our meeting. Then all agreed upon group conduct to best facilitate progress for our work group. We said that the meeting norms should be to let people have the floor and be respectful of their time to speak. Stay on topic. The chair at that time stated that he would be encouraging that very thing. So now Brian can do that. Okay. Remember the overall goal is the point, and our reason for being here and our time together. It's a higher purpose, for the best of our whole entire state. The decisions needed to be quorum, in other words, a majority, and majority rules and a vote. That concluded those meeting norms. Alex motioned for our group to accept and utilize the Sunshine Law and Robert's Rules of Order, and Jessica seconded. And then I have a link that I will send to you that does allow you to connect with the list of Robert's Rules of Order. Per Mary's suggestion, the chairman, Steve Pryor, read aloud the issued statement clarifying HB 1490 Workgroups by the Lieutenant Governor and the legislative leaders. HB 1490 was designed to vest the the education work groups the power to shape recommendations for academic standards absent influence from bureaucrats and politicians. Under the law, after DESE convened the initial meeting, the power shifts to the groups alone to guide themselves each month with the goal of delivering their best academic standards recommendations by October 1st, 2015. That's when they have to be done. There exists no authority in the statute for DESE to dictate the deliberations of these work groups, nor even to guide their deliberations after the initial organizing meetings held yesterday. This one was sent, unless invited to do so by the individual work groups. There was a motion to discuss the big ideas of the current standards. Began by focusing on changes to existing Missouri standards. So we took the Missouri standards and began working on those, remembering to pay attention to the audience. In other words, who would be reading them and using them. Then review additional materials of their sources and compare to our edited Missouri standards. We agreed as a group to restructure the format for clarity. Everyone liked the format. At that time, I remember, liked the format of the North Carolina State Standards. In other words, not the content, but the way it was laid out on the page. Does anybody else remember that in the case?
I just remember us discussing right to left from left to right.
Right.
And that's what I remembered. I didn't remember that. I didn't have the computer screen.
Right. All agreed that text publishers, and I'll try to do better when I say all agreed. I presume that it was the majority. I guess I should be more specific, make sure there aren't some who don't agree. But, all agreed that text publishers should just be one of many sources and not the only thing that dictates the course of the lesson. Mary suggested that concepts build to include a comparison of our government-to-government systems outside our borders. Alex stated the social studies starts with personal, local, country, and then to the world. Brian encouraged compare and contrast strands. Brian, world history and American history be side by side with government and economy and would be worked in as well. It was mentioned that we have a section on how our early documents shaped our republic. Brian suggested combining 3A and 3B to just be 3, and if you look at your GOEs, then you'll see, yes, yeah. That's very specific, that number there is very specific to what we're looking for. Steve mentioned power strands, and that was not totally agreed upon, with colors to guide emphasis for priority to include as they are constructing their curriculum from the standards. Could be a style of text or asterisk, so it could be copied in black and white and reduce the printing cost. Alex suggested critical thinking be a focus of the standards. Jessica suggested the academic vocabulary. The cognitive process dimensions to assist in the use of terms to describe the level of understanding in each standard. That was a reference point for the definition of each term we were using. It was very helpful, I thought. Then when the people are utilizing it, they can go back to that source to understand what we meant by each term, whether it was explained or clarified. And in our situation, as we were reviewing it, it looked like the term analyze was being overused. And so we tried to be more specific with our terminology. Focused on strand 1, principles and documents shaping our republic. With grade level 6, we had world history, we had participate, the republic, and then identify were the terms that we would change. Again, she has record of that though. She said that to you, that you reported to them. Okay. I do not remember. We did talk about, I'm jumping in. Okay. In 7th grade world history, we changed, or we emphasized participate, multiply government systems was added, not analyze, not apply, but explain. In 8th grade American history, we had emphasized sources, documents, clarify analysis, To determine was important to really use individuals of history and who created the documents. In high school, we had world history to analyze change over time to determine citizens, government, and their responsibilities. High school American history analyzed role, priority, and word picture. Government was to evaluate effectiveness. The chair proposed that we not meet on October the 2nd and the 3rd, because they thought that was too quickly to get right back together. We were informed that there would be a tentative plenary meeting on October the 3rd, which I will attend. The secretary volunteered to attend this meeting and report to the group, and I will send you the minutes. November 10th was agreed upon as a possible meeting day. You guys have record of that? Okay. No agreement on the meeting location at that time. It was mentioned by Jessica to contact Desi to allow them the opportunity to arrange a meeting room. December 1st was agreed upon as a possible day for our work group meeting. Does everybody have a record of that? December 1st. A meeting room again to be arranged. Future meetings to begin at 8:30 to 4 p.m. So that's what I'm going to try to do in each time. Brian offered to bring a projector to allow the group to view the existing standards and see as the agreed upon changes were being made on the computer by Jessica. Was there agreed to do that?
Brian failed.
Right.
I thought,
Okay, that would be wonderful. We're eventually able to do that. That would be very helpful. The day was concluded with a 2 p.m. meeting with the K through 5 social studies work group. Notification from the chairman, Steve Pryor. That's another thing. Okay, all right, so that concludes what I have. I don't know what your meeting, was it helpful to meet with K through? That concludes my notes.
any questions about the notes? You'll notice that when we get to that part, when we focus on strand 1, we actually tried to practice looking at a current strand as it flowed through different grade levels, and try to get something that builds over time, starting with our first 5, 6th grade, or 12th grade, and just try to look through what it would look like to work through standards. Since we had not yet gotten any standards worked yet. We found that, I think, to be valuable work time, quick conversation time, to be able to actually look at those standards and see what it's like to have conversations around that work of writing standards that build over time and ask students to do something meaningful and help make it clear for teachers what they should do with this. So those specific references. I think Jessica didn't keep the edits from that.
I just completed it.
Down. If we decide to start from that place with our work today and continue working on that project, we should start from that. Maybe any other questions or comments or clarifications on 923?
So there was a meeting with a K through 5 group. And I guess my question about that is, I understand we're working independently from them, but what is the process to ensure that they are aligned to us and vice versa, and that by the time kids get to high school, they're going to be well prepared for the high school social studies experience? Is there some, am I to assume that that's all going to be okay?
We will be meeting with them. In fact, the suggestion has been made that when we have our meetings, that we will be in the same building as the lower grades. So therefore we can be more cohesive whenever we decide we need to meet together. So I think it will work itself out.
And I think that's also easier to share, is, I think, their job is to kind of communicate back and forth between these committees to make sure that we're both kind of separate realms. Because I think as a committee, we task the chair to kind of be that link of communication between both, and something is kind of awry, and we can, hey, listen, we, because we're talking about different worlds, so that's also reassurance.
I remember back in the part of our meeting, talks having the chairs be the known list of
slightly different focus. We talked that the elementary group has a different focus and different mindset than people who are content experts. And so those teachers are thinking about how do I fit in social studies with everything else. And we're all thinking about social studies, and that's our role every day. So that we might be slightly different coming out of both groups, and we will try to keep those meeting times together if possible, so that we can have some common time or experience together to have some, maybe hash out some of those very basic things that affect both sides of the table. So today they are next door. If the group is okay with that, I'll meet with them at some point. It'll be a lunch to see if they were interested in meeting perhaps tomorrow for a short time. But that invitation is going to happen.
If I follow up on that, I sat in for 2 hours with that group, and it was striking to me. I wrote down quotes. History has become a sideshow. History has become a backseat to the focus on math and English in K through 5. Their concern was to raise the visibility of the significance of the subject. And I thought that was intriguing. And that discussion went all the way around the table. The administrators and the teachers right around the table.
And we did make a comment, NCLB had a lot of responsibility in that, because once you focused on testing and math and English, the very important information of social studies did take the backseat. And I think that's one of the corrections that as Bill related to.
The superintendent from Charleston said that his teachers actually asked him last year if they could, in the 3 weeks running up to the test, not even deal with social studies.
And that's such a shame.
So I think that's, we can have that discussion when we talk about, let's sort of tag team that, our perspectives on elementary meeting. And I think a lot of, part of the reason why it's hard to get social studies in elementary is because of lack of connection, and the clarity of the standards. And the standards are clear, so that I can make some of those connections. Perhaps it will be easier for our teachers to make that work. If they're so raw that they can't understand them, then they're less likely to make them their mistake.
Well, and let me ask a question real quick. Whenever we had the preliminary session, and we're talking about standards and framework, and forgive me for being a little bit still kind of feeling that that's foggy. My understanding was we were to fill in the grade level expectations, correct? That is what the GLE, that is what we are to
The documents they brought the last time, were correct.
So I guess it's been determined by someone that the current course level expectations are not effective, or they need to be revised.
That is not
So if we start from that perspective, looking at our current course level expectations, and somewhere along the way, we've said what, or the government has said what, I guess. I'm trying to figure out, is there a problem with our current course level expectations?
That's a very good question.
Because it seems like we have something in place right now, maybe those are great, maybe they're not. I don't know if that's been determined.
So that's quite a while team moving in our first set of meetings, and so that was our natural beginning point, was to start looking at what we had, start thinking about aligning what we currently have in a slightly more intuitive way, so that we could see, and we were going through pretty methodically to try to determine, is anything missing, is anything lacking, where will we end up making revisions or changes. So we did choose our current standards to be the starting point. I would say at this point that work is very, very young. And so we, as a committee, have not come to a conclusion about the quality of where we are right now.
I'd like to make the point that, in the first couple of meetings, because things were a little chaotic in trying to determine, is everyone in the same place with our charge related to House Bill 1490 and getting to a place where we could function as a group, knowing what we're all here for, having consensus with what we're going to do, that while I certainly certainly am not suggesting that we throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I do think that Missouri Learning Standards in the area of social studies education, K through 12, has some really great pieces that we need to sustain. But I do think we need to talk about the trends and the changing world that we live in today in comparison to when these standards were originally written, and back up a little bit to talk about where have we been, where are we currently, and where are we going in relationship to social studies education and preparing our kids for college, career, and citizenship. And then go back and look at that. We never had a chance to quite get there. So Sir Larry, Mr. Gray, Dr. Gray, is Larry okay? That what elementary had done, which was a nice piece to see, is actually talk about things that really, when we talk about a citizen of the U.S. today, what are things that are most important that they know in preparing from elementary, from middle school, and then from middle school for high school, and high school for college, career, and civic life, which is where you heard that global component, global citizenship, or global appreciation awareness, where the discussion for some other pieces came up, and the principles and processes of citizenship just in general. And we didn't get to that point, and I do think that that would be very instrumental in our work. So when you ask, have we decided that, they're good, bad, or we're indifferent in that area, our first attempt was, can we get in and actually look at the documents and talk through? In my opinion, that's the way I felt we were approaching this, and start to look at where things were, how it was set up, what strands are there related to social studies, and then actually dabble with a few standards to see that vertical articulation or that alignment that goes across grade levels. And one of the things that we noticed was, one, we felt like some of the strands of social studies that were embedded in the current standards might be combined. The format that is currently there is a little cumbersome and hard to follow, K through 12. And third, that our understanding of some of the academic vocabulary or the verbs that indicate the depth of knowledge of which kids need to go weren't well picked for today's thinking and education, what we think about cognitively with kids and trying to get them to the level of learning that we want to do. So my opinion, coming out of those first two meetings, where we kind of come into this one, and what I propose we can think about is, we know that our current standards do address 6 strands or 5 strands of social studies, and then historical thinking, or social science thinking, I guess I should say. And that we need to look at making sure that whatever we do, that we consider depth of knowledge, the level in which kids need to go. And then the next thing that we need to do, probably the most important thing before we go back into the standards document, is consider what does it look like to be college, career, and citizenship ready for a student in Missouri, and then build backwards to make sure that our standards align.
Well, for me, as a parent, when I hear all that, sometimes I'm ignorant of some of the terminology that we're using for doing that. But as a parent, what I want for my child to learn isn't something that people are telling them where to go, but how to think. And where do we learn those principles of liberty? And where are those foundations found? And for me, it's found in world history, looking at the world from 4000 BC or earliest documents, and placing America in that context of why we have so much more freedom and why our powers have been limited, so that it's not centralized. Every time you have centralized power, it always leads to slavery. In any facet of human history, you find that, whether it's kings or communism, whatever. Communism is just a trade-off for kings. Essentially, they just replaced who's the king, a communist leader, as you well know, and then their cohorts end up in their big mansions. But I find it very important that they have independent thinking ability and not coerced thinking, and we want to be careful not to shape their thinking as opposed to helping them think for themselves. Does that make sense?
So we're starting to get into that discussion, which will, I think we'll need to close this up and then get into that discussion of where we move forward. What are the logical steps that we need to this to be our last day of learning, and then we will have to have that discussion of what needs to be done today, what's step one, what do we want to accomplish, and then where do we go from there? Because we will need to decide ultimately, that we are charged, how do we work with our standards? And what the question that you raised is very important. Do we take our current Missouri GOE COE, and do we start from there and we start working through that framework of organization, or do we feel like that is not representative of what we need to do and we need to start at some other inspiration to get started? So I think that just a suggestion about maybe thinking about what the end product should be is we can't start working on things and then decide that all that's not good.
I do have another question. I'm sorry on one of these items that I missed the first meeting. I'm annoying until I get clear in my mind what I need to figure out. But the other question I have is, I'm assuming that the standards we develop will permeate all of the subjects within social studies, right? So, as you know, in social studies, there are a variety of electives, all the way from psychology and sociology to world history to all that other stuff that's there. So we're charged with coming up with standards that will meet the needs of all of those courses within social studies. Or are we talking about certain subjects?
I believe that as far as how the law directs is that we're considering, correct me, history, government, economics.
The core requirements,
Okay.
courses that the state
Yeah.
require the students to graduate.
Right.
Okay.
Not like this.
And then my
And
last
there are also
question.
other statutes you have to consider. There are statutes that mandate the US Constitution, US history, Missouri Constitution, Missouri history, and other statutes that are kind of, they're out there, like Veterans Day, and then Constitution Day is a different federal law. So we have to be sure to incorporate alignment with what's mandated.
As you know, the course level expectations for high school, they are course driven. So when the district offers that course, they are to address those standards within that course. So right now, if you look at our document, which we'll review that, there are vertical columns for those courses. And so that is what we started looking at, is those columns. So it was a course driven standard.
And the other thing that drives this is ultimately what's going to be assessed, and how will that be assessed? And I know that is probably not the charge of our group here. However, that is a very critical piece to the overall perspective, the global perspective of this work. Because at some point, someone is going to say, we're going to give kids in government a test, or we're going to give kids in American history a test. And I know that will happen after the fact, but I think it's very important that if our work is going to ultimately inform that assessment, I think that makes it even more important that we are assessing the right things, teaching the right things.
And I think wasn't it communicated about the assessment that we didn't want to teach to the assessment?
It's in the law that the assessment applies to the standards.
Right, I guess that's my point.
That's in the law, we try to do this.
Yeah. And those assessments have not been developed yet.
That according to the law, was developed after, within a year of this.
Okay.
In House Bill 1490, line 6, 160.518, it specifically says that we should pay particular attention when we're looking at these standards to consider problem solving, analytical ability, evaluation, creativity, application, and consider performance based. And so that's part of the discussion that came out with the academic vocabulary and the cognitive process to make sure that when we're looking at standards that we consider the level in which kids have to go.
Which will vary from grade level to grade level.
And it should be vertically aligned so that you see the depth increasing.
Development.
Yeah.
Any other questions specifically targeted around our work?
just sort of for you framed. I wonder if you would go ahead and send them
I already did.
She sent it to
Yeah,
you.
I'm going to send it to you.
I had something else to say. They may want to see that. And I know, as Jamie said, it's very, that we did accomplish, we think, possibly one standard. And if there's any input in that you all have as far as terminology, we all thought it was pretty good.
Are you including all on that one?
I was gonna say that.
And we're moving on to the planner group and the information that we got in the planner group.
Really?
Well, I put the conversation on Thursday. Okay.
Okay, on 10/3/14, regarding morning meeting in the House chambers, there were statements presented by Senator Ed Emery and Kurt Bauer, that's
Barr.
Barr, followed by questions from the attending work group members. Statement, you are autonomous. Each work group needs to form a leadership, vote for a chairman and a secretary to facilitate discussions. Each work group needs the secretary and the chairman to mutually decide and prepare a report monthly. For each work group, the chair and the secretary will put together what should be presented to the House. Information I received from Senator Dempsey's assistant about this subject regarding the reporting process. I am working on clarification. She said statute doesn't speak to any process. Once we get the process settled, we will email that out to the group. And then I told you about the list I got about a form we need to complete. Intent is to not accept Common Core standards. We can use multiple sources such as Massachusetts standards in all public domain items. It was never intended to rubber stamp Common Core. It is not public domain. I guess we wait for questions. Senator Emery and Rose, his assistant, said that they are available for questions at any time. He said there needs to be coordination between the K-5 and the K-12, the 6 through 12, K through 5 and 6 through 12 work groups. Legislators should have coordinated with the state board because they didn't coordinate the process ahead of time. And it has many areas that need to be straightened out. So it was very confusing at first. The bill was all about replacing Common Core all along so that we as a state can get the right to own our own standards. The goal is not to keep or remove Common Core, it is to have the best educational standards that Missouri can provide for our children. There's our charge. Senator Emery encourages that we not expedite the process, but take time to fully evaluate and give time to process the information and fully consider each decision. Time between meetings is valuable to consider decisions. It is important to allow that. Our legislators are available to gather resources as we need them, so we can ask and would be happy to help with meeting rooms, especially encouraging the meeting of K through 5 and 6 through 12 so they would have a cohesive set of standards when we are completed. Encourages working groups to meet collectively to coordinate. Cannot be required because we are each autonomous. The House chamber is available for us to use as we would like. Senator Barr mentioned that. Then there was question and answer session. Said, are we bound by the Sunshine Law? At first they were not sure if we had to be, then found we are subject, in fact, to the Sunshine Law because of the way the groups were constructed. So we need to respect the Sunshine Law. Our Common Core standards copywritten? That was one of the questions. They said it is our understanding that it is, so it is not to be copied by the work groups.
May I make a point of mention?
previous standards were not copywritten, only pre-2009 standards are in the public domain. We do have to maintain certain things to meet the No Child Left Behind, was the question. Excuse me, do we have to maintain certain things to meet the No Child Left Behind? The answer was no, we just need to meet what is the best standards for our students. Importance of the number of 75 standards, that was the question. In 1973, concerns of our reaching and excessive control of government to safeguard, in 1973, there were concerns of overreaching and excessive control. So safeguards of a cap of 75 standards to limit government control were put in place. But the 75 had to be approved by government. You are not limited to grade level equivalent. It says you are not limited to grade level equivalent standards.
Is it okay if I clarify?
Yeah, go ahead.
The two folks who legislature really had a hard time understanding frameworks and standards.
Right.
So that was clarifying that the 75 number, specified in the law, refers to the place map, the 7, that we have 7 number all standards, social studies with the process standards, the match standards. Those represent 75 standards. These subject sets frameworks, which are also sometimes called standards. When it comes to those are very level of personal expectations. That we're just trying to clarify the number and what we can change.
And just to clarify, what's on the blue placemat is not under consideration in this group.
Yes,
It is.
That
My
is
understanding that it was.
1993, it's not 1973, that's incorrect in your notes, it's actually, these were done in 1993, and that was referring to the 75 on the blue place map.
I think we need to hold on to that.
Just a second. Let's see.
Question.
I have SB 380 created in 1993. The 75 show me standards, the blue placement standards, we are not to touch these. The GLEs they are what Common Core effected. Under these and are what the HB 1490 is referring to being rewritten. Frameworks are independent of GLEs and existed prior to GLEs. There is no mandate for changing those.
And that was my understanding as well, because the blue placemat falls under an existing law, Senate Bill 380, which is not under review in this one.
Senate Bill 380 was used as a foundation for 1490. They are the same language.
Okay.
It was lifted, that's why I was very careful to stay within the existing statute so that the legislators could see the existing statute was violated. So you don't have to compare the two. That's what HB 1490 is. With the addition of information that clarified where it was being used. All right, now, once it left my hands and went to legislators, you start the sausage making of the bill. And then there's a whole bunch of people that I foresee have discussions about what's gonna be in there. That's, okay, the point is, they're the same law, but when you see those excerpts of boldface, that's where there was additional new language, where you see the brackets, that's where language is taken out.
And
But
so,
now it looks like it's there.
so we got the clarification.
I have to say, that I don't think it's the intent to preserve a line.
But that's what the House, the senators told us,
In
right?
terms of the numbers, I don't think they understand, there is misinformation on that.
It doesn't matter, but they've said that's not to be changed.
Right now, this is what we've been informed.
All right, I'll go back to them and explain.
I think we can do our work today and tomorrow without having to have that answer.
Yes, yeah.
And ultimately, we'll need to seek a clear answer, in a legal way.
Right now, this is the answer we've been given, that probably does need to be cleared up even more. The next point was, a question was made about the brackets, and it did say in the Missouri statute, the bracket is to indicate something that has been removed from the law. HB 1490 mentioned the curriculum framework being different, and how is this different than the standards? 2001 Massachusetts is a framework, so what is our charge is the question. Are we to do framework also? Question. Common Core has main standards in branches out to a more expletive framework. Senators stumbled over this answer. So far, the answer was, they were just suggesting that we first develop the standards and then can recommend a framework, but that wasn't answered clearly at the time. Very well.
Okay, so, any other?
I'm not to the end, but let's see. There's another deal about this framework and standard, but again, we didn't answer it clearly. Why do some groups have such a small group of people, which when we first convened, we had 9. When 16 or 17 are the numbers stated in the law. We are to proceed during the monthly reports. It should be stated who is missing and what number has been in attendance for the work groups during each phase. Decide who is missing to let them know who is yet to be appointed, and the positions will continue to be filled. So we may continue to have additional members. We are taking the Common Core test this year at the public schools after we have redone our standards that will incorporate a new test for the following year after the new standards are adopted. There is 1 year lag after the new standards are adopted for tests to be created. Who creates the assessment was the question. The state works with a company that creates the assessments. Once standards are adopted, it could even be an out-of-state company. Senator stated legislation does not involve the assessment process, just setting the standards. Is it okay to have a lobbyist to work on a work group? It is legal for lobbyists to be on a work group. It is legal as long as they meet all the other criteria that is required. Common Core standards are off the table as a source. When we develop standards, we can develop something similar, but cannot be copied and pasted. He says, what about terms of usage? And then we're going to check with legal team to specify that. Do next generation standards qualify as Common Core?
That's specifically a science.
That's specifically science. That was a question. That was exactly right. Senators mentioned that the law states that there will be 3 public hearings, the first in a month, then 6 months after that, and 3 meetings after we are done with the process. How should the working groups hear what is in each of these meetings? The meetings are open to the public, and we are encouraged to attend. These meetings are to help guide our process so we have a final product that will be accepted and not rejected. Appointees that don't meet requirements, it will need to be addressed by the appointing parties. Curriculum alignment initiative, a question about that. It needs to be provided to every work group, especially since it is mentioned in the law. So in addition, an original was collected and it would be distributed to all of the work groups to utilize as a source. Everybody, any questions?
Okay, I would recommend that we give everybody 1 chance to talk.
Okay.
Just go around with clarifications, so that we don't get stuck on issues. So, would you like to start?
I just had a question.
Yeah. Ways to talk so we can come back.
So what I'm understanding is there was a bill in 1973 that limited, no, it was 1993? That's 93, it was 93, so, okay. I thought I heard that, but again,
That was SB 380.
SB 380, thank you.
Mary, you have a question or comment about?
I just wrote your notes.
Oh,
Yes.
thank you so much.
Got any questions? Very,
Very helpful, thank you.
Does everybody understand what the curriculum alignment initiative is? Was I the only one that didn't know right away?
I think we, Mary provided a copy, or we
She-
got copies last
I
time.
have one of those.
Okay.
Does it- you know,
I think it was clarified, but I was just going to reference a clarification on Common Core. I'm by no means advocating that we keep word use, but that there is fair use to use Common Core, and that what if that clarification was sent out after legal. That was one thing I wanted to say earlier.
Jamie, comments on that report?
No, I was gonna mention on fair use clarification as well.
So you are, or I'm misunderstanding, I think.
So there was a question in Q&A on whether or not Common Core could be used. It can.
It's copyrighted, and so it's not public domain.
So the National Governors like Common Core standards for the purposes that support Common Core state standards initiatives. These uses may involve the Common Core state standards as a whole or selective excerpts or portions.
And
So
that's
there's a letter in its entirety which clarifies that.
for the purposes of the initiative. If you do not participate in the initiative, then it's not.
Okay, again, we
I'm
are
not saying.
we're not advocating usage, we're not, that it is legal to use it if you so choose to.
Oh, okay.
So
So
there
different.
there are
It's
strings
NGA.
attached to it being.
Okay. The NGA,
There's not.
sorry, clarification on the NGA for the law is only if you are going to promote the Common Core standards can you use the Common Core standards.
I don't think it's your turn yet, I'm sorry, chairperson, are we all the way around? I'm not trying to be difficult, but in order to maintain order and make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak, I'd really like to adhere to our rules that we agreed upon.
I'm sorry, he looked at me, I apologize.
Thanks.
We give everybody a chance to speak and we can have an open dialogue if we need to have open dialogue on that issue, you're aware of that. I also attended, the meeting, and found it very interesting. I did ask about the public hearings, that was my question, and, none of us need to attend those, sort of take risks as past with attending those. And then they were gonna come up with a way to get that feedback back to us. Part of our job is to report to the state board on our progress, so they have something to present. And then, my one comment, I did hear Senator Emery say, that their hope was not to limit, what standards we draw from. Perhaps he would retract that later, but if someone goes that. I don't think that the specific Common Core standards apply significantly to our work and would encourage the group not to get too involved in that discussion because our standards currently do not reflect the Common Core. I think we have lots of other good sources to draw from. So I would hope that while that might be a task for other groups, that not to draw us into a battle on that front. Alex, questions or comments? Leslie, questions or comments? Yeah.
Just minor comment that I agree, I don't think Common Core really applies to what we have to do here. I think there is still, Jessica, where did that, notice you?
It's from the National Governors Association and the Council of State School Officers. There was
I
a
think
letter.
there is still, there are a lot of debates going on about how exactly that reads, and that it's free to use if you use it for promoting Common Core, but not if you don't. So that's lawyerville, but again, I don't think it directly affects what we're doing. The other question I have is on the blue place map. At the moment, the understanding is that that is not what we're tasked with adjusting. That's our best understanding at this point, until we're notified by whoever that program may be. Is that correct?
I think that we should move forward, understanding that as our charge and ask for clarification, knowing that eventually it will affect our work. Open discussion on comments that were made or other discussion we have around this clarification.
Just to address Dave's question, the notes I took when I set it in K5, I wrote down goals, 4 goals and standards will likely not change. That was the assumption they were working on.
And I think the goals are right, it's not a mere technicality, but it is a single phrase that is incorrect on the replacement. And I understand keeping it in place, because you would have mayhem between subject areas saying, well, I only got 15 standards, I want 18, and then have to negotiate with all of that. That's not the argument. I think the structure, the macro structure of placement is correct. Our problem is phrase in the social studies section, and I'll deal with the legislators who probably aren't aware
I ask what the phrase is that she's referring to?
It's number one. And so we'll notice that in our copy of work, we have to revise grade one of the principles of the republic.
It says principles expressed in the document shaping constitutional democracy in the United States. I think consistent with our constitution.
Okay, which one is that? I'm sorry.
Number one, on the social
So currently, we have two phrases that refer to American. One is constitutional democracy,
I would have to
our
say,
document is there's two different versions.
it's open discussion, correct, right now?
I would like to keep it towards our.
Did I, I'm sorry, excuse me,
It is, but,
excuse me, did I, finish with my question today? No, I think, oh, sorry, jump in, sorry. So, my question was, to that, because I think the K-5 was directly directing their attention towards to replace that. And my question again is, are we going to stay away from that until we get further clarification? Or are we going to discuss it? I think we need to kind of settle on that to say for sure, and at what point we bring it back up if we haven't had clarification.
I think it's a foundational principle, so I think clarification is extremely important.
We could easily get stuck in a hole there.
Yeah.
Not get anything done today. And I think that a big agenda item will be deciding our agenda and what we decide to work on today. When we get stuck with that, I think that we need to address that when it's relevant. I would like to move past that.
And I agree. My only concern is that we don't leave it only to the legislators to get around to thinking about it, that we bring it back up at December or pick a time that we make sure that they are getting us the information we need.
I like
So we can do what we need to do in our,
I like that next report tomorrow, so.
with it.
Other discussion. So the purpose of this time is to review our progress of our last meeting, two sessions, both the sheriff and planning session, as far as our clarify our work. I move that we end discussion on those and set on the agenda for our work. And there's time for a break. We take a 10-minute break. Take a 10-minute break.
Has anyone tried the coffee over here yet?
Oh, that's right.
What's that?
Has anyone tried the coffee over here yet?
I have not.
You know, do they stronger, dark?
This is the end of the preset meetings. So I can put on our work preset. We'll be setting up has to be an agenda item for tomorrow. And we'll be getting communications with the inclusion.
I'm just wondering if it's possible to have this set other than on Monday.
Madam Chair.
We set meetings dates based on the majority of the group, the vote there, so.
Sure.
The dates that we set are I don't know what day of the week our other two meetings that we set on.
When are those?
The 10th and the 1st.
November 10th, first. Monday's the 12th.
Well, I teach my Mary, did she just drill?
Plus, they
Yeah.
have,
Is that a daytime class or evening class?
it's daytime,
And those are just single days, they're not 2 days together.
The group felt like because of holidays and things like that, that it was easier to meet once, so maybe spread it to each day.
But we can discuss future needs after those, possibly each other times.
It doesn't matter that you have 3 weeks, if you sold, which means you are out of control of who will buy them and what the content will be once they are. I don't know why you can't see the bigger picture. That's the danger.
No, I don't know.
Have you found the latest Facebook meeting?
The latest one.
No, it's like home now. It's like.
Very.
Yeah.
Up the ramp to it.
So what do you do now? What's your
The last 20 years of the program, at the AT&T plant in the band in the West Coast area. Decided to get a life in that area, kids.
First I'll show you.
Yeah. So are you involved here as a parent or an educator?
Yeah, as a parent. And that, being a smart ass who thought I knew everything, I got really tied up in the various things getting fast and showing the facts on it. And when I went to find them, they weren't there. And I fell back on something else that I thought I knew. That wasn't true. So I kind of chucked everything, went back to Homer and started working my way forward.
Yeah.
It's for the 8
See, I want to cut.
See yourself taught the story.
Yeah, so I've been really interested in that instance. As it is in my areas. And then especially around how education has been handled. When this came up, and then
It makes sense because like.
we have 3 kids, but they're spaced apart enough that we've had one in here, that's out at least 20 years. Watching and wondering if there were this.
Sometimes they say select all, but even if it did say select all, I think if I do all that's on the page.
Where did you say you were?
I teach for the university. School sprinkle.
And then, you gotta find help.
Been involved with high school social studies for more than a decade. Not my university years, but it's classroom experience. And then a few years, so now you have to.
Any kind of question really good or?
Just, you mean in meetings or just over?
Just kind of overall, honestly, way more than my classes.
Yeah. There, I guess probably I'm more concerned with the advanced courses. The advanced placement courses, because there's so much thesis hours.
You were watching this for?
Put on those courses, at the upper levels of, secondary ed, in preparation for college, and I feel like don't prepare you for college. I taught with, AP courses and full credit, and,
learn more through credit than they did AP US history because there was so much that was covered in AP US history and so little time that you just things were, slip through the cracks. And I feel like we worked a little bit to include the important information. There's some ideas and things that definitely need to be hit, but to leave some of the other stuff to the right schedule.
Now you do, well, I could change, but.
I think it's only fair that I do a credit course student walk away with 3 full credits and, college, and they can pass that test. Then they lose out on everything. So I'd like to see that reward a little bit. Oh, I was talking about the Asian classes and how there is just so much information, and I get why they want all that information, but some of these stuff through the cracks because there's so much time. I almost feel like it needs to either be split up into 2 groups or I think that's more IB. Or maybe so reserve the future.
What time?
This is why they remind that they don't use that. I have a very sincere because citizenship matters. And what they did is reverse that's language arts with such. So that stories, because I call it stories, were everything from, because that was volunteering, which is how it started out. Recognizing this whatever. They were living houses.
Where was this Jesus?
Which were not, but this is which is a reason too. I'll tell you, with the emphasis, and one of their is use so currency. It's agreed to use in our last meeting. Which is exactly what is that basically standard and change the language. And it's much easier. But for me, I say get rid of all this stuff. Let's start January. There are 2 lists. If it were B lists, I'll just go and so that's up to me. So I don't get into all that. I think it's just instead of teaching them how to do it. I'm into let's read books and do book reports. That just gives me but that's curriculum. That's standards. So
There's no mention of the progress and why.
It's hard to know where the line is. I mean, the thing that I said is primary sources, automatic, things like this. That's what people everybody else's opinion in writing all this stuff, it gets away from the actual intent, the content of history. So I find this stuff to be very textbook driven. And so we had goals of getting away from textbooks with some.
Without which.
Economics.
Oh, yeah, exactly. But they got this.
No, it's not. But it's just, it's a drive-by history, and it's
not a foundational school. And so they've not been taught where man is coming from. They don't have that introduced. I thought that was a mirror. That's what I'm saying to the next class.
It's just,
Everybody gets reading to get Brian a gavel.
My wife's Zumba water bottle there. I'd like to spend no more than 10 minutes talking about the elementary group and their progress. First, I'd like to make a point of clarification. Larry and I both sat in as an observer, and it's really hard to not interact as an observer. I know it's hard, but I like to ask that any interactions between observers and work group members be done outside of the room, if that's okay. Be okay with that? That is part of that. They're charged and here is an active member of the group, and that can be done. Being an active member can be done lots of ways, including passing information, so I like that and then outside so we can limit to that. Larry, would you like to, you were at the first of the 2 meetings last time, would you like to speak for just a moment about your observations about their progress and what they were working on?
I thought they moved on really nicely. I said it for the entire morning session, and the issues that they struggled with were, should social studies support interdisciplinary learning, or should it be silos? History, geography, economics, government. And their sentiment was, no, it shouldn't be silos. It should show the interrelationship of those areas. And they were concerned that the standards should reflect, quote, the human perspective, not just facts. So they felt was one of the shortcomings. They were concerned with the tools of inquiry. They spent a good deal of time talking about the tools of inquiry. One person said, one of the tools listed there is telephone books. No one has telephone books anymore. It should be something more like databases. What is it that students would be using? Where are the primary sources now that are most useful in investigation? And then they spend a lot of time on this global awareness versus American exceptionalism debate. And I recollect the superintendent from Charleston said that folks in his district are very much committed to the idea of American exceptionalism, whether it's the movement here to go to more global awareness. He wasn't advocating that. He said that's going to be an issue that group's going to have to confront. And being an observer, I couldn't say anything, but I said, you can have both. I mean, Americans have each generation has believed it to be exceptional, but in a global setting, and most Americans understand they live in a global setting.
And the other notes I put were, I think I already shared, they were concerned collectively about history at the K through 5 level being sideshow and backseat to math and English test. And so I think a perspective on that is, as they spent a considerable amount of time, even in the 2 days that we met, doing what we will still need to do, which is thinking about what a social studies learner should learn, what they should come out of social studies after their 12 years of 13 years of public education, knowing and being able to do. And so those conversations all fit within that discussion about what a student should be able to do because they have been this constant social studies for several years. The next day I sat in, it was the day of the plenary session, and their main order of work was just to break down our current standards so they have an understanding of what's currently there. And so they did that by putting posters on the walls. So they have their room filled with posters, one per grade level. So this might be grade 5. And on grade 5, they had horizontal columns, horizontal rows for the 7 strands indicated in their document. So government, history, so on, all the way down to 7. And then they cut and pasted the little individual frameworks, the individual standards from each of those, and just put them on that horizontal row. And then they walked around and made notes to themselves about what they noticed was there, sort of some strengths and some weaknesses of that document. So that's how they used to break it down. And visually, that was very powerful because it showed them holes and places where there's too much. And so that might lead them, that's part of the charge today, I think, is that might lead them to maybe shuffle some things and where they're taught, and allow them to do some of those connections between subjects. I don't know where they're going to go with that today. I just know that was sort of a logical next step from that, is what do we do with that? That is how they chose to understand the lead document for grade K through 5. And so they did continue to have those conversations about how do we bring in local awareness from K through 5, because they never talked about world history, so how they connect America with the world, as Julie mentioned, at different places in every grade level, so that they're aware of what's going on, because that's just the United States. And they did talk a lot about how can we make citizenship a really big part of every class, every subject, all the way through, so that they have that every day, every year, understanding citizenship in that approach. So as far as what they did that time, that did take quite a bit of time to get through those. And I feel like those are all just still foundation setting moments to help them set their goal for working forward. So that's sort of where they are, and it might be really revealing to find out where they are at today. So if the group is interested, you can consider meeting with them a little bit, perhaps tomorrow, after we can find out if they have been engaged in this day. Any clarifying questions on the elementary group?
How did the process you see compare to the structure that you had proposed in a draft form in our last meeting? When you made it kind of with,
I
you
think,
see a relationship?
I think they thought it was interesting, and it may not be the exact structure that they feel is appropriate. I think that after a couple of weeks of digesting all that, they're taking a little place. So I can't give that for an answer.
Something I would like to revisit as a point that I brought up in our last meeting was this idea that textbook history is very boring on certain levels, and actually primary source of biographies, lists, really, book reports, things like that to me, and I realize there's curricular and some of that. How do we sort of, I want to say, motivate possibility of,
If we have-
influential people
If we have a
next
discussion
time.
about values, if we desire to have a discussion about values for our social studies learners, I think that we can come up with a document that would help guide the values that we try to use as we shape our standards. So if we have that discussion, we decide to have that discussion, we can certainly have that.
It's just sorry, just to jump on there with what you're mentioning with the global versus the American. What puzzles me is if you're teaching history as history, you would be going through kind of world perspective, and then as America comes out and Britain and so forth, that should make it clear whether something is or is not exceptional or different. I'm just wondering, are we trying to teach, trying to go through setting up only American history, or are we looking at global history as well?
As this group is tasked with those courses that Missouri mandates, our students learn world history, American history, and government. And I said they have really solid minds over there on many different perspectives, and so I feel like that they're very capable of considering a balanced approach, as Larry suggested, and just to recognize that their current expectations of American history. So that's what I'm very concerned about. How do we let them know that there's something else besides America? So I feel like very good place for that. Good discussion. Very discussions.
I teach world history as part of my curriculum in the middle school level, and we do that. I mean, that comes with, you start with abuses when power is unlimited, you get to the great and the thank you for democracy and why that's part of our culture, we get to the Roman Republic, and we get to the Magna Carta. So that's all in there, it's part of it.
And that's what I would assume, that if all of that is gone through, it should be, why the wonder about whether something is exceptional or not, and the need to look at two different things. One, it should be one that gives you perspective on how history has developed and where we're at now. It's just, that's
And then again, it sort of came out of this discussion that I mentioned with Julie about what should social studies be for our students. And so
yeah.
I think that's certainly a value that we might consider. Those are sort of value statements that guide how we think we look at the data.
Philosophical.
Absolutely. And many state documents have some of those philosophical underpinnings as part of the document to guide just help other people understand how they make decisions. At this time, I'd like to move that we set some agenda items for our work today, and then we can look at what order we would like to do them, not necessarily having to propose them in the order they would be done, but things that we feel are important for our work today to move on. And we all know, hopefully, where we are. So if someone would like to, maybe volunteering to report, someone would report, let's just throw out, without discussion, some things that we feel need to be accomplished that's not our foundational work today.
I think getting back to just a little earlier in the conversation, the social studies student possibility, that to me seems pretty straightforward in terms of giving us foundation, and as we mentioned, something to kind of look back on as we're starting to create these things and get in the weeds of these conversations to make sure we're checking what we believe social studies should do to know and do with the standards we're creating. So.
By the time they graduate from high school, is that your perspective?
You know, I like it because I gave these to colleagues, some teach world history, some teach economics, some teach government, American history. Each level, as a student, and master these, they be ready for the course. So I think it's really important.
Other items. I'd like to have us look at our current standards again individually
to take a look at the format. To try to put this together. This is what we were discussing the last half of the last day. Is that kind of a direction you want to continue with, or?
You said discuss the format.
The format.
The format of the layout, is that what you're saying, the layout?
Right, particularly as we were looking at it at the end of the last meeting.
One thing I liked about Brian's suggestion of changing the format and the purpose of that was so that our work is original in its intention, a certain aspect. Does that make sense? As Missouri. And not just a copycat, borderline lookalike of what everybody else necessarily doing. So I prefer the second part. Is that better?
To that, I did take everything that was in our current standards, and flip them, into the horizontal, format that we discussed, and I will send that to you here, and I'll, have her send those out to you, I should make copies. It was difficult work, and it's not quite as clean as the original format, but, it is very interesting, so.
It did an interesting job of integrating all the separate areas, which I thought was good with what we were getting to.
Does that make sense to you guys? So I just put review designs, new format design, the structure's different, but everything is the same.
I wonder if at that point, we might be able to place where we can decide as a group, if that format is, works for our needs, or if we need a different format. I wonder if after these other steps, if we would be at a place where we could make that sort of what our standard document needs to, how it needs to be formatted, and so what it's going to communicate.
Goals for student, is that what you're saying?
I have a hard time explaining, other than, when we look at other state documents, we're gonna see that they are much more specific in terms of content. And they value a specificity for teachers, not exactly how to teach, but specific content that students should be able to do. And ours, is more general. And so I guess that discussion about which way does this document need to lean? Does it need to lean more specific or more general? And I think we'll be able to have that discussion after we get to the examples. I think that will make more sense.
Would that be trying to identify what particular foundational documents would be? Is that how you mean, or?
I mean that our current document, there are many things that are just wide open.
Right.
And it doesn't tell you, there's not very much guidance of when and where to place that. And other state documents will notice have very specific history or other content that is suggested, including reference to specific kinds of documents or different kinds of people, or some limited guidance on what to teach. I think that is pretty evident.
So these are sort of the actions, and this page is sort of easier to do. I think it's important to allow the actions maybe. So then I'm not sure if there's a more logical order to.
Other items. Well, I have a question. How are we defining standards, or has that been defined for us? I'm embarrassed to ask that question, but I really don't know, because we're going out this term, and I'm not for sure if I have clear in my mind what we mean by that, because there are standards, and then there are objectives that will fall under that, the specific things that teachers will teach, that I'm assuming that each local school district will determine on its own what they want those objectives within that umbrella to be. So when we say standards, what do we mean by that term?
Suggestions.
No, it can't be a suggestion. It's got to be something applicable to what all students should know and be able to do in Missouri. And I'm just wondering, how is that defined for us? Does anyone have any insight on that? Or is it just the face value, we all understand what a standard is, and we just accepted that?
Well, we did take a few minutes, at the beginning of, or 2 meetings last time, to kind of go through for lack of a better word, kind of the hierarchy of what work is coming from us versus the frameworks or even curriculum, and talking about standards that are grade level expectations and that kind of thing. So I don't know if anyone still has those papers. Did you have those papers, or did Steve? Remember the papers that we pulled down? Yeah, I don't have all of them. And I'm not saying we have to pull them out, but we did have that discussion, so.
But the goal, just very superficially, is that the standards will be used for local school districts to develop their own curriculum. And use those standards as the guide.
If you think of Maury's objectives, all right, so you start out A, B, C, D, D. Your audience, you can read the condition, the degree, and the duration, for how long they will have it, all right? So what we're saying, our audience is going to be structured at certain grade levels. The behaviors in knowing and what we're able to do is as far as we go. We do not determine the conditions under which these teachers will test it.
Right.
We do not determine the degree to which they will know it or the duration for how long. We stop just trying to help guide the first two parts of what they're going to write. So it leaves you at the general end and allows the school districts and teachers to determine the more micro level of that. And you can talk later about why it's important to be clear about what they will know and be able to do in terms of how that assists in designing good tasks. If you're too vague, you have people all over the map, not because the kids didn't learn, but because the test items were not consistent with how people interpreted the standards. So, we want to stay general. We know we're guiding those other parts of an objective, but we want to be clear so that everybody gets a chance to demonstrate their success.
I would say that's very well spoken. Just to the side, our district led the American history and the course exam last year, and there was a question on there that read, why did cattle ranching develop in West Texas? Which is sort of our joke now, our districts. Because, really, why is that important? But that was an interpretation of a personal expectation that my teachers would not have thought so about cattle ranching in West Texas explicitly, and the geographic characteristics of West Texas that make that possible. Now they might have talked about ranching because that's important. So the way that we communicate standards does help someone create some assessment around those standards to develop good assessments, so that we can measure it properly. So and I think we'll be really well equipped to answer that question as we look at examples of standards. But we may notice that some states are more specific, and we may not feel like that is appropriate for our students because of this, how specific they go. So we might be able to get answers for that and give some examples.
I would just like to reinforce what Mary said, here to what you said, and add to, we're also thinking about not just the statewide assessment that is being done to look at all kids, but even local assessments, so that understanding, because we were speaking about depth, that teachers are understanding you're supposed to go, even with their own assessment in their own classrooms or in their own buildings or districts, however that might be handled, so that that is clean enough and clear enough that they are able to do that as well, so that everything does align neatly. But again, paying attention to general versus specific and not being too specific as well.
Do we need to add any other agenda items for the farm foundational work today? I think that would take a long time.
Yeah, and then we'll be glad to get through that.
So we've got discussion, what do social studies students need to know, be able to do, reviewing sometime as an individual in Missouri, and we have some samples, discussing the layout and design of the standards, and finding a document that might help us do that. Attempting to make a maybe final discussion today on formatting, discussing the idea of general versus specific, and then also defining standard, possibly after we've seen some more examples of probably how specific we want this to be.
That format that we're supposed to fill out in the report, do you want to discuss that at the end of the day?
Yes. Any seconds where gender for today?
Would that go on the agenda?
Let's do, so what, yeah, what are housekeeping things we need to do, and we need to talk about the reporting form, is that?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so we need to, that first meeting is Monday, next week, before the board, correct? And Brian, I think you addressed that, but I can't remember who you said we need to be there.
State board.
Are we to be there? Oh,
That's
No.
not the same.
Public hearings just said that
I remember the public can be there.
the state board is to collect ideas and thoughts for the
Not as a
public.
group, we don't,
We're not
that's the state board,
That 27th.
but you're allowed to be there to help.
Okay.
Just real quickly, can we agree on the time for lunch? Just because that time is too far away.
Actually, my lunch is already started 15 minutes ago.
Is 11:30 an okay time for lunch? So that's the break early again.
Okay, so lunch.
Really? And I'm second on the show.
Any other additions to our agenda before we,
Or agenda,
unless anything down?
we would like to move to approve our agenda. All in favor? Aye. Okay.
Sorry, I wrote down your 2 pages. This page after.
Do we feel comfortable moving, starting with our discussion about what the students need to know to be able to by high school graduation?
I think that
Or do
would,
we want to use things?
I think that one, you know, it's one of the new standards that I really want to go.
We would like to keep track of our best ideas.
You can,
Current teacher view.
I know, this is why you get prizes, right?
that's
That's how we can keep it.
You can write this, these are sticky. I'll
just taking
I'll take these off and then take it off. You'll stick them in the window. And then that's about very good.
I like taking it. The multiple color.
I'd like to encourage us to use this time to think about those big ideas, those value statements, as Mary put it, that will help us make good decisions about what we do and what we look at, to guide our discussions.
Can I tell you very balanced statement made to me that helped me understand what I need to do with the rest of my life? I was listening to a senator who, in my entire career, was centered around education of kids. That's all I wanted to pay attention to. I knew politics kind of shoved us in one way or another, but my focus was in my classroom, on quality of instruction, having a good synergy between parent, school, child, until a senator said to me, you may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you. And I thought that was his statement, until I went back to the Greek history, that was Pericles. Okay? And the whole point is, I think we need to have an educated student body that understands everything about their quality of life, including the licensure for the jobs they may go for, the cost of their higher education, everything is affected by government politics. And that it's a delusion to not engage in government service. It's not, some people, maybe myself included, thought that was something for other people who thought it was their calling. But if you're a citizen in this country, it's your calling. That's what we are. And I know that that's clear enough. Pardon?
How would you summarize that for us?
You may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you. I would say that there has to be a knowledge of the effects of the political and government processes on every aspect of it.
So, the government affects me, I can affect the government.
Yes, I like that.
The tools we need to participate.
Yes.
Your ability to live your life depends upon your understanding of your place in your government and public, which will rule on how you can live your life.
Our place in the country.
Or that there's an interdependent relationship between the government and its citizens. One cannot make it without the other. That's just a brainstorm.
Yeah.
Should I just start brainstorming?
Yeah. Yeah, probably, but, what's frustrated me at times is the idea that the government is separate from the citizens. And, I come across that talking with kids and their friends and whatever, and it's just politics and things going on, as if that is something separate from them. And I don't know how to emphasize that without getting all.
Well, again, I think you make a very valid point in the fact that it all depends on what governmental system we're looking at as to the level of interdependence that might exist, the lack thereof, or it might be extremely broad. So I think that we have to keep that in mind, but that's huge. I mean, that in a, I don't know what to say, that interdependence has to either be there or it's not there for us to see what type of governmental system actually exists.
Didn't we touch on that in the end of our?
Yeah.
There's an opening for that states, SS 13.5, 1.10.
Yeah, that's actually really
That's
important.
what we're on.
And it's with, I gave a story, one of our political scientists, he liked that way, he said, determine the civic responsibilities of individual citizens, but to go to your point, he said, should also include responsibilities of the government to citizens. That is, you said that too, it's interrelated.
Well, that we are in government as the legal body for the people.
One thing I did want to add too, because we're talking about what students need to know and be able to do, so I think we can have something in there about methods of participation in government for citizens, so that our students will they know, they can start a petition, they can vote, they can run themselves.
Yeah.
So,
Well, what does that look like to say we are a government of the people, by the people, for the people?
Yeah, when we look at the C3, that third C is civic engagement. And so there's an opportunity with almost anything we teach. So what can you do with that? So how does that relate to our government in our life? And you can make a difference. Like if we're talking about like the progressive era, we're talking about laws that were passed like tech workers or to ensure our food supply, so how does that apply to your life and what could you do with that? So that's a really open opportunity that we can
We need to make sure though that that's taught at every grade level, not just 6th grade or 7th grade. Because I find that teachers
does civic engagement look like, if at all, under different systems of government?
And one thing I'd like to point out too, there's a difference between what we have in our curriculum and what's taught in the classroom. My sister works in a district that is looking at borderline family, and she's been told point blank, you want to use social studies. Now, she's my sister, and so she teaches language arts using social studies and everything else. So when we look at a classroom or what someone does, all we can do is control what we expect, and it is expected at every level. You know, if a teacher's not teaching that, that's wrong, that's morally, ethically, wrong. But we've got it in there. So please know that that engagement is in every level of the school, from my neighborhood in kindergarten to government classes at the high school level. It's always there.
Jessica brought up vocabulary. I think that's huge, to have, vocabulary.
Okay, but let me clarify a little bit. When we were talking about academic vocabulary, we were specifically mentioning the depth in which kids need to learn and be able to engage with the learning, which is a little bit different than regular vocabulary. So I'm not sure what you're speaking to, so I just wanted to make sure that we clarify that.
Well, I still believe in vocabulary terms, and I know a lot of schools don't. I've kind of dropped that some, at least, spelling words, things like that. And I think it's important to have vocabulary, but I also think that's important for K through 5 because and I brought that up today. Trying to transition from the lower grades and types of English verbiage that they can read and bringing that into the
So social studies specific vocabulary.
right. I would say.
Well, we have those terms now embedded in the employees, and in fact, we even have glossaries that help to unify those definitions across the state. So I think that's very helpful and probably should consider or continue as well.
I think what Jessica had mentioned at the last meeting, it wasn't particular glossary vocabulary, it was about the terms we were using.
Right, there's actually 3 tiers of vocabulary when you're thinking about the learning of kids, and one of which is the social studies specific, that academic piece that we were talking about, which is the cognitive process, that vocabulary like analyze and interpret, and that we need to make sure that kids know and are able to actually do in their mind and on paper or in action, that they understand what it is that they're supposed to be thinking about and what level they're supposed to get with it. And so it is a little bit of both.
So I'll I'm kind of drawn with all of these ideas are related, this was our same conversation, that we would maybe title civic participation, and then we've got some variations in there, we'll have to play with more. This is kind of a new idea, so I'll try to categorize as we go. I don't think it'll be clean.
I have one more thought. How do you identify authentic sources of information?
Valid versus invalid.
Yeah, like not Saturday night live.
It's on the internet.
It's been a few years since I've had a child actually say that to me. They know now.
They don't know. They really won't.
I think maybe the follow-up to it, or with all of this, pretty much we have vocabulary, with this really discipline-specific vocabulary, evaluating various sources of information, and I might add using sources of information in that.
Yes.
And I think all of that kind of goes together.
That's great.
I think tying into like your writing, we need to focus a lot on writing, and that will help also with if we can work together with English language arts and applying our sources to our writing as well. I find a lot of college students coming up that they don't know how to write for history, and they don't understand that it is different than writing for other subjects. So teaching to that will definitely help as well.
Good, you guys are talking nice orderly way. Civic comments.
but I think there needs to be some cultural literacy when it comes to history. In other words, a student in Lebanon should have the same kind of awareness about certain historical things as kids in Ladue or Sikeston or St. Joseph, Missouri. Does that make sense? And I know the standards attempt to do that, but you know, it's embarrassing when you watch jaywalking on the Tonight Show and people can't even identify their state on a map. And I think that's embarrassing, and unfortunately, I think that's a reflection on those of us who are in education. We should have solved that problem somewhere along the way. So I don't know what I'm wanting to say, but it seems to me that there are some things, specific things even, that we want all kids to know, just to be literate in America. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Kevin, are you talking about like the Declaration, not the Declaration, sorry, that would be basic, the Gettysburg Address, the invasion of D-Day, so those things that you would assume an American would know.
But don't, for whatever reason. Yeah, and those are examples, and there are probably countless others, and I'm sure we don't have time to go into all of that, but I think there are some things historically that unify us as Americans. And I think all kids need to have that understanding. And when we say all kids need to know that and be able to do that stuff by the time they graduate from high school, those are some of the things that I'm talking about here.
Absolutely right, and there's a cultural literacy that's enjoyed by people who can travel, that isn't shared by people who can't, and somehow we have to bring that into the classroom, so they have the same kind of knowledge.
Right.
Yes.
And wouldn't it be great when kids transfer from Missouri to Louisiana, they can share a common knowledge base, and they can have discourse, and they can vote when they move to Louisiana because they know what that is all about. So I don't know where that all fits into this, but I do think there are some essential things that all kids have to know and be able to do that are even more specific than vague and broad standards.
So I got a little, I started to change this as you were explaining to almost a shared base of knowledge, you know, as you were kind of describing. I think that we were talking about maybe possibly identifying some benchmark knowledge markers of some sort that are going to make it easier for students to navigate some of these bigger things that we are over here. But I kind of then think the travel component is a little bit different, Mary. So I kind of want to pull that apart now.
Well, what I'm getting at is that shared knowledge of culture in state and country, because Missourians are a different culture from other parts of the country. Each state has its own culture, and we do have a culture as Americans. I think that's what the statute is trying to get at when it said you will teach Missouri history and Constitution and American history and Constitution. I think it was trying to get at the cultural aspect, not just the documents. It didn't say it well.
So you're saying on Missouri,
Let's see, a shared base of knowledge of Missouri and American culture. Yeah, culture.
But should we take that globally then? Because it should understand the way that, I mean, you know,
so
I don't know a college student who doesn't study abroad anymore.
Right.
You know, when I went, I was the only one of my friends who went. And if students can't function in the outside world as global as our economy is, they're not gonna do very well in business. So,
But it's a compare and contrast kind of thing. It doesn't mean, I think that's the big discussion nationally.
But it's also interdependence as well.
I see.
So, I mean, I don't know if we have to decide that right now, but I do like that it's local, you know, you have local, state, national, global. I mean, you have to consider all those when you're thinking K through 12. So ultimately, by the time we're graduating, they need to be at a point where they can think more globally, but think of themselves as a Missourian, as an American within that global context.
Here's a question for you though. I'm from Ozarks, and we have a different culture than Kansas City and St. Louis.
That's the
Do we go local and assume that would be an item we would put into the test?
so I would say they do that the primary one.
Yeah, we have to think of, this is at the, my understanding, this is when you're graduating, we should be at a point where they're at that global piece, but they have to start, you know what I mean, keep looking at where where am I within my world? I mean, let's make it that simple. In kindergarten, where my world is my family, you know, and then, but here, when you have seniors going out into college, it's really where am I as a Missourian American in this global world, because they're going out and that's where they're going.
Well, then even the misconceptions they have, like, for instance, all of my students are sure the Chinese economy is so much more huge than ours, and it's a huge threat. And then I pop up the chart with the GDP, we're on world. I mean, they've got to know where the United States places within the multicultural society, and they don't. That's something we're working, just starting to work at the middle school.
And so, but when we're talking about that, that's talking about current events, we're not talking about history. So, I mean, how much time and effort is spent on current events with that when you talk about current economy and where we fit in the current economy? I mean, you're kind of talking about.
But we're not just talking about history right now, we're talking about
That's economics, but whenever, so I'm asking a question. So my question is, when we're talking about economics on the blue placemat as one of the subject matters that we're to address in the areas, are we to be looking at that as a historical economics?
Both.
Okay, so then how much time do we spend looking at historical and how much, you know, as you say, global today? So,
Well, we don't focus on duration.
Right, but that's not our job.
And so I think now we're just trying to kind of think about at the end of the journey, what does a kid have to know that social studies is most equipped to provide? Right, so a lot of these things you can learn in other places. You know, our teachers work together, have a lot of opportunity for students to learn these things. And we're just trying to make sure that as we decide what to keep, what to add, what to omit as we work through standards, we're really ensuring that the place of social studies can be most effective. And the skills that we want students to have, we want to give them the ones that we can give the best. And so kind of we're thinking, like, I'm seeing a huge thread that you guys have identified as our students need to know how to participate in government. They need to understand the importance of government in their life, and social studies is the best place to do that. And we'll have to finesse that, but that's what all of those first section. And then our second idea was that kids have to be able to navigate source material, both historic and current. It's complex, there's so much information, they're gonna have to know vocabulary, they have to know how to write. And this is something that is unique to our discipline, and we can teach this very well. So when we're moving through standards, we don't wanna lose that. We're gonna have to, again, tweak and finesse. Now here, what I'm kind of seeing, this is turning into, they have to understand that your perspective in the world and your position can be very local. Me, here's what I am as a person, here's what I am as my local community, here's what I am as a state, here's what I am as the United States of America, here's how I play in the global market. And again, I do think that you guys are kind of, this is what social studies can do very well. And so I've kind of already, you've come up with 3 major items where kids are able to understand and do this. Actually, like, awesome. So, you know, I think we'll have to finesse our language a little bit. So what else? You know, we've got 3 really awesome things.
I think we need to address, you know, how much new material needs to be addressed if we're looking at grade level expectations. What's reviewable, what's new?
That's not what they need to know by the end of their high school career.
Totally agree.
We agree with you, but that's like
I mean, I'm kind of asking that question again, you know, because when you're talking about all this, what kids need to know, how much of the year needs to be spent on review, how much needs to be spent on, am
Like everyone else has said, I think we all agree with that, but I think that's gonna have to come later after we decide what everyone needs to know by the time they graduate. And because then we can start breaking it down and deciding what needs to be reviewed and what needs to be added.
That's important because we need to drive the test. And if we decide that some review is necessary before you can engage again at a higher level in high school, then the test be like that. And that will come in the language we're speaking.
I think if we're doing the job we should be doing, they should be getting a fundamental grasp of history from from most ancient to modern, and geography, where these events took place, how they shaped different peoples and governments, and at that point, then they should have a good idea of how they here are different from California or Spain or wherever else. The fundamental history and geography tied together. If we did that right, I think they should have that overall sense of themselves in relation to outside.
It gets back to what Jessica was saying, how do they developmentally ready to think outside themselves? Right, because that's what you're talking about.
Right, now it's very important by the time they graduate, right? So we're looking at 18-year-olds at this point. So I like the geographic.
I heard geographic and economic skills, is what
I would say should know here too.
Yeah, so two things, to follow on that and then not follow that, something else. I think what we've been speaking to, and I think that K5 as well spoke to it too, is almost the interdisciplinarity between social studies. And I would love for, our social studies students to be able to analyze problems across the different lenses that social studies lends them. So to be able to see a problem as a political problem, as an economic problem, as a geographic problem, and as a historical issue. And so I'd love to see the interdisciplinarity of that some way, in some way, shape, or form, kind of, be something we're aspiring toward.
Right, and may I add too, because I was just thinking about as Jay was putting up geography. So when you're thinking about that interdependence piece, while we tend to go to economics with that word, when you're talking about, citizenship, the interdependence between government and the citizen, you're looking at interdependence between the world you live in and how you impact it impacts you geographically. When you're looking at interdependence between the economic component, that's exactly what you're saying. So we are good enough at doing this, we could actually create some pieces that actually allow for those lenses to interconnect. So how does the world, how does where we live impact how we live, and how does how we live, or where we have the opposite of live?
It would be fantastic if they didn't come back from class saying, well, I learned about economics and that's this other thing, and not connect the economics with history and everything.
Right,
else.
exactly.
They start looking at those as a separate thing, and it's
Exactly.
very frustrating.
Right, it needs to,
And
so here's the problem, and then.
there's different ways to that. And I'll add one more, I think we talked about cultural literacy, I think we also need to think about cultural critique. And give students the, equip them with the kind of skills they need to be able to assess social problems. And again, that we can argue about citizenship. So,
How ideas develop across time and the events that follow them in different areas, which include economics and history.
Like identifying the change and continuities over time.
It is, but that's about the only thing that I wanted to mention this, not address this, if that chronological understanding of history, is that important? Because there are theme-based standards in some areas where we're sort of looking at themes, but as the chronology is the understanding of how things have changed and what has stayed the same. Continuity of change is really, I think, a value that we should look for, and that does help us. If we value that, that does help us to build in those other things that are key moments, key changes. In our history.
If you don't, it seems to me if you don't teach the chronologically, things don't click and fit in place.
You can teach outside, but you need to do something to bring it together at the end. Because I used to teach the math people in American history. But at the end, we did this giant timeline, and the West was one color, industrialization is another, and that pulls it together. Otherwise, especially at the lower grade, developmentally appropriate, if you're jumping all of that at once, they need everything we know from great research. They need that schema, that framework which to attach. And themes are great, but you're absolutely right. It needs to somehow be put in a linear, a timeline framework.
And it doesn't mean we talked about it, not just in terms of kids, but to our standards, we have to have a vision. The first first-year teacher in a rural district who has no support system. They should be able to pick up these standards and say, I know what to do.
With some level of specificity too, though. I mean, I think if we expect all kids to know something about the Declaration of Independence, then teachers need to be told or given some guidance that you better make sure you teach this, because, not because it's gonna be tested, but because we want all kids to know and be able to do that.
This is our cultural.
Right, that's exactly right.
I think the GLEs, the police, they did that and somewhat well, but
It
I
can
think
go
it needs to be a little more specific.
I apologize, I will go too finished.
Okay.
Okay. And remember that there's this level, and then there's the local level, where that curriculum, that can be specified after district and curriculum level, and oftentimes throughout the state that is, and then in some areas it is not. So I do think that's a gap, but I think that's a different issue than where we are here at this table right now. I don't disagree with you, Kevin, necessarily, in what you're saying, but you do have some districts that have more specificity in there than others because of the work that they've done, and some that don't, but again, outside the course of our charge here right now.
But I don't know if that's necessarily true, because I see this as an opportunity to level the playing field too, from one district to another. I don't know that the kids in Rockwood necessarily should be more privileged than the ones in Parkville, Missouri, with what's being taught.
Knowledge can be gained to that computer, in other words.
Well, I'm just saying, what's good for one kid in Missouri should be good for all kids in Missouri, regardless of where they live or their socioeconomic background or any of that. And I think we have a great opportunity here with this work to ensure that standards are consistent and the knowledge is consistent. I think that's what we're talking about here too on some level, is just a knowledge base
Yes.
that makes all of this possible.
But you have to allow for the local community, like I said, the Ozarks is going to respond differently to this than Kansas City. And you have to be respectful of local input into the statements.
Yeah.
So we can't micromanage, but we can provide clear guidance.
Yeah.
As to how these different subcultures within our state are going to respond.
Yeah, and I don't want to micromanage, and I don't want to specify resources, and I don't want to get into instructional methodologies, because an effective teacher is going to do that, okay? But I just think it's very important here that, you know, the standards, whatever they are, apply to every kid in Missouri.
Are we saying something like that with this particular, with this general topic that is being addressed, it should include reference to these few bullet points, and does that tie them down more than we should, or?
I think that we will have a whole lot more examples to look at. We'll be able to speak more fluently personally and have evidence to sort of look at. If we look at the variance in different states, and this is sort of what I was sort of hinting at, is some states are more specific with their standards than we are, and that content is more specific than what our current standards are. And so I think when you look at those examples, you'll be able to make personal connections and connect this conversation to those, and that will help us have a better conversation about when we talk about specific. We're not talking about you're going to teach this name and that name and that place by doing this, but what does specific mean? And so that I think looking at examples of what specific is relative.
One that
I think we see that.
One that might be like, if you're talking about Civil War in the Ozarks as opposed to Kansas City, it took, a number of battles took place in Missouri. One section may be more focused on these particular ones, one section these ones. But if we keep it at, there are Civil War battles that were major and involved Missouri, what were significant in your area? And we want to pick one or two that everyone should know, and you should also know your own regional.
Our people would be going to the national battlefield.
So let me give you just an example. For instance, in our curriculum, in our standards, they have a statement like analyze the development of American domestic and foreign policy in these following areas. And then the bullet points, and then has reconstruction. Another state might say students should be able to analyze the conflict between the different parts of government during the Reconstruction era. Okay, so that's the kind of specific that a standard does without becoming a curriculum. So I think I think this is be really valuable.
I think I missed someone, I feel like I heard at some point, and I just didn't get it written down. Did somebody mention comparative, being able to compare, or am I making it up? I thought,
I say comparing
There's
graphs.
geography.
ability to compare across, did I get it written down? Yeah, okay, sorry.
Since these are the young people that come into my class in the fall semester, all of these are important, but every summer I have a departmental retreat where we assess how we're doing and how the students are doing coming into our program. Now, all those things up there, one leaves off the page to me, and it's evaluating the sources, using sources of information, crafting arguments, de-aligning. That is the biggest challenge that I think students at any level face. And I'll take this even one step further. I survey our alumni, and I said, what is it we did that helped you be successful? What are your careers? Teaching, law, whatever it was. And they always come back to two words. You taught us how to research, you taught us how to write. No one ever said, Dr. Greg is that great class you taught in colonial America. No one ever said that. They just say they're still driven. And that's the really big, not that these others aren't important, but they really, really are important. That's the driver for me.
Well, and I'm gonna back that up teaching AP, and I think if there's anyone else in the room that has as well, that kids will say the same thing in high school, going into college when they come back. Thank you so much, I was well prepared going in. Because that is a huge piece as part of the AP piece. It should be in every classroom as well, but I can say from a high school perspective, that we're hearing that same argument out of because.
I would agree that, I think your point is well taken there. One of the problems I have with writing across the curriculum is that different disciplines have different writing styles. And you can't expect the English teacher to teach every style. Now, you can expect basic, grammar, sentence structure, that sort of thing. But if there's a style in history, that's unique to what social studies teachers do. And
You write for
And you're right, I mean, truly to me, that is the best part of this, is that, you need to have a stream for writing for the social studies. I have people coming into my graduate class who only know MLA. And they don't know how to write in an objective format and take themselves out of the picture, which is amazing.
or Chicago style, there, different colleges are gonna
Exactly.
do different kinds. So, we have that 7 strands of legislative inquiry, and we might all agree, that could be better integrated. Or right now, we have a 9 through 12, and it's the standards are the same all over the career. But we might decide that we might be spending some good time working on that 7th strand at some point, so that we can say, rather than sticking you at the end, you're really important, so how can we emphasize you?
How do we integrate you?
So I might just note that, it's not really my kid, but I almost lose that.
Inquiry, yeah,
So I'm gonna
thinking
just-
skills. And I know that the elementary group, Larry is back in on that, they were also sitting in that inquiry.
Yeah.
So we're not alone in that.
I have graduate students who tell me this is their second degree, and then I'm introducing them to ABA. This is sad. This is very sad.
And I do think, I mean, you're right, the term, the way that we think, sort of, that we analyze, I think those need really go hand in hand. So I think, you know, emphasizing that as a student is really critical.
We could probably, loving history, probably go on and on again. We want to use these characteristics to help us analyze current standards, and then what do other states do related to those, and what are some of these best ideas that are out of it? How are they implementing those? And so I would suggest that after we come back from lunch, we would have some work time to look at, even in small groups, we feel like, looking at the different standards, documents, and notes, taking notes on them about things that we feel that we like, that help accomplish these work goals. And then we can have a discussion, an organized discussion around them after we've had some work time.
Look at just our state standards or look at the
All
different states? You know, I wish we had some resources, and I'd be happy to go grab them. I'm gonna make a suggestion. If we could take notes in a way that we could, put them on sticky notes or on pieces of paper, if we all did that, we could then put them and move them around and look at the patterns and trends that we're coming up with. And then we could actually start to see our trends and trends and patterns of thought, and we might actually map out where we wanna go very simply, rather than having to talk so much. We can walk around, move it around, and read what other people have, and put our sticky notes where they go, match up, and I don't know where we can get those, but we have some here, we have some here, I don't know, that's just a thought. We do it on pieces of paper, but it sure would make our work happen a lot faster.
What do you think about having a poster for the different standards, and then we have thought about, like, say, Massachusetts, and then I thought about Massachusetts, or you think, like, we have a post-it, and we think Massachusetts does something well on assessing social problems, and so posted over there. Which
I think if we take these and make individual posters of these things we put down so far, we may have some others that come up and spread them around the room, then as we put up like some color or like, right, extras. Because then it might outline other things we didn't think of. Am I making sense? So if we take notes, just read and take notes, and on the sticky notes. Or you can put it on a piece of paper, then we go around and do a little gallery walk. So if we see things that we like, that fall with the evaluated sources, we can put it there. But then we may have some notes that come out that we didn't even address up here, that we can put in a separate spot, that we can go back and look at and say, you know what, we need to think about this idea too, we need to think about this. Am I making sense?
Yes, and I would like to just add to that, we really have to appreciate what we've done here, because this is what makes us uniquely Missouri. We have not referenced any other document, we haven't consulted with anyone. Within this room, we have identified what we think is most important. And I think that's key, I think that's critical to all of this.
And I'd like to applaud the caliber of professionalism and knowledge.
Absolutely.
I don't think we need anybody else telling us what we're gonna do.
Now, that's not to say that we have missed something within our
No,
rules.
but we have some very talented people in Missouri, and I respect that.
So, as far as the protocol, I might recommend, we will probably want to have all of us gather a copy of each of the documents, and then we'll come back for lunch, we'll agree on the time. We'll notice that we're not trying to understand the whole document, but how is it structured, and what are they using for standards, what does it look like? A lot of these documents, they have a space at the beginning where they talk about themes that they're emphasizing, or other things that you're trying to thread through. So spend time looking for that, and I would recommend, when you use a sticky note, reference the name of the source, so Massachusetts or Ohio, and when we have a great idea, and it fits with one of our themes that Jamie's gonna put up, then we can go ahead and put those sticky notes there. That way we know what source that we got that idea from.
Well, and I'm thinking, I'm just trying to phrase that last from the geographic impact, because we did that in kind of two different directions. One one was an orientation, I think that was, we were really talking about the interdisciplinary nature of.
I'll be my co-host.
Yeah.
Do you, Nancy or Becky, I don't know if you guys can answer this, but when we go to lunch, can we leave stuff in this room? Is it being locked? Should we take our computers with us?
It's very visible.
That's it. Yeah, it appears to be that way, that's here too.
We have the DESI course level expectations in here as well. We have a copy of that.
We're all given last Friday, so we have electronic copies.
You can have mine, I'll look at mine electronically.
I mean, I can fill it out.
I don't mind, so if you want to.
Here we go.
Oh, okay.
Oh, these are pages.
Here we have Massachusetts, New York, just parts of them because they're very long.
And you might want to share.
Ohio, California. We have to look for the course level expectations for Missouri and continue to new copy. This is the C3 framework of the National Council of Social Studies. It is not concept-based, it is process-based, so it's going to emphasize the using of sources, the planning inquiries and stuff like that, so it's not.
Can I make a suggestion? And that's all it is. But I work best when I'm working toward a goal, and I'm wondering if it would be good for us to consider creating a vision statement for social studies so that we can say, by the time students graduate from Missouri high schools, they will be able to do something with all the knowledge, all the processes, all that stuff, so that as we move along, we can reflect. Will these things help us to achieve that goal? Does that make sense? Anyone? In other words, I'd like to have as I'm trying to figure all of this out, a target. And will this help us reach the target?
I think we'll need to take that and pretty it up.
It requires some synthesis, you know, but I don't think that's a bad thing either, because I think that helps the process along.
I think we
Is
can have.
that what it's not, it's not exactly, it's.
Well, I guess I'm even wanting something more basic than that. Kids will be able to do all of these things, but without bulleting all of them. It's sort of like a course rationale.
I hear what you're saying. I think once we have all of this defined, we can take that and mesh it into something like you're saying.
Okay.
Synthesize it together, I think. I'm hearing what you're saying.
I know that when we develop courses, we have to have a rationale that supports the development of that course. You know, the course description follows that. But at least people can understand why it's really.
Maybe there's gonna be a lecture for this. 11:30 to 12:30.
I will not be back until probably 10 after 1. So we not need to wait on me.
We're just gonna be working, reading and thinking in small group discussions. Probably do that for probably 3 minutes. So we'll go
Because we're mapping.
down the street to the
It's pretty visible and I don't think it'll be
Oh, put that back on me.
Depending on your level of understanding of social studies, you have the answer to that.
This is last one. We're not gonna make any decisions without you on time.
Well, anyone interested, Dr. Stosky is in room, hearing room 2 at the Capitol should be there from noon to 1.
She's responsible for putting Massachusetts on one next. She's speaking for next door. I don't really know what she's speaking about. Might be something, if you can have, hearing room 2, in the basement, and turn down the castle. It's on the far side where we are.
I'm planning on being back tomorrow, but you go wait. Okay,
Well, if you could, find your.
Remember what you told me?
All my tests.
I've been browsing through a field and
How are your little kids?
it's interesting how
No.
But anyway, because this just came up.
Yeah, but I had to make my contacts.
I said, why are you asking me? I said, you just texted me. So it's right there, except for now I can.
Plus I had other things, my kids, you know, 'cause I think I would think about it, was, I just had my old one, I had my old kids, started, I was, you know, like, video was hiring, and I said, lunch, you know, him, you know.
Yeah.
And I got started on the text, grade, and it was from 2011, and it was even yes, that I do.
Oh, do you?
Yes. Yeah, I've done, curriculum work and sample lessons. And you know, I got many sodas and tea from there.
Are you going over Becky?
Yeah.
I always give her too much stuff. I should just.
So like the body builder.
Yeah, I was struggling to see somewhere I could do my computer, but I am not.
You know what, I can stay and you could go and then if you wanna come back and I'll bring stuff back.
Okay, do you wanna do that? Thank you.
Be happy to. I was gonna
So
offer it to everybody.
Yeah, we'll,
May I tell them this?
yeah, definitely, because,
I'll stay.
and I'll be back.
You just made so many.
Yeah, and I'll bring,
You wanna bring me back lunch?
Yeah, we'll do that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I know what you would do. Well, I can tell you why. Just, you know, I'm not that care.
Thank you, ladies, are awesome, thank you.
You know, you're around. You know, I like to show you. I trust you. I trust you. Okay. Yeah. Part of me wants the laptop to just be still running. Thank you. Oh, you're very welcome. I was just calling you back. She is.
Okay, I was gonna say, I'll take your spot.
Oh, you're very sweet, thank you. I think I'm good.
Brain numbing. Oh, wow, we use the whole thing? Oh my gosh.
Oh, we need more paper, I bet I can get some. We do that. Well, I'll wait till she comes back. and
Yeah,
I'll finish.
well, I can go to the restroom, you can run there and go get it. How far would you have to go to get there?
Oh, not far, just the one building over.
Oh,
Not
okay.
a problem.
Okay, I'll go with you.
Eight 30, 9:30, 10:30. 11:30, 12:30, 1:30, 2:30. 7 hours. Start at 7:30. Start at 7:30. All those times I was bored, I remember I holding the line, so I'm holding the string, what we measured, those distances between things or how distance I put on for rows and rows of lettuce and beets, which I couldn't read. We sat in the back of the car, we sat still in the road, sat while crowds to the wheelie coast to the pedal, wasn't even bored, thinking hard up, and of course, the small details.
I'm just saying this could be an episode of Survivor. Island stuff's easy.
You know what though, I gotta really compliment you on your notes, because I'm gonna take her too, obviously. And you heard and remembered a lot of things that I didn't. It was just so interesting, you know, because, and I've done this with other people where we scripted and scribed and whatever, that our filters just hear stuff or don't hear stuff. And it's like, we were insane. And I thought, oh my God, I really liked it. So, and I think what happened for me is that I started to get tired. In the second half of day two, I bet you do too. You have a lot of scribing. And when you all got to that really, I thought it was really rich discussion about the articulation of those,
that first strand,
Yeah.
first grade all the way up, it's like sixth grade up through government. I didn't have the please in front of me, and I should have just brought them up online. And so I couldn't follow fast enough how you were, I got most of the changes, but not all the rest of the standard for that grade. And so my notes started to fall apart. And so I was just so thankful to hear yours, and they were really good. I mean, just very factual and complete. I thought they were very helpful.
Well, thank
I think everybody thought they were.
I'm so glad to hear you say that.
Yeah.
Because when they nominate you, they didn't really ask if you've ever done this before, if you know what you're doing.
Exactly. And it's not easy. You know, you have to follow the line of thinking and try to capture the essence of it, because you can't write everything down.
That's for sure.
So,
This is going better than the first day. You were there for the first day.
oh, yeah.
My first thought is what the first day.
But you know what? We're making progress. And I feel like that, you know, there's a nice balance of people. I mean, it's exactly what the law was hoping for, I think, which is to get this whole multiple perspective, you know, on a really rich and kind of complex undertaking, but still so worthwhile. And it's an example of what we're talking about. We are an example of the democratic process. It just almost makes me cry. You know, it's like democracy in action around this table. You know, listening respectfully, trying to find the value. What is it that's driving this comment? How can we monitor that? You know, I might not agree with the detail or the specifics, but I definitely agree with the.
We all agree with the goal.
I think so.
Yeah, I mean, you know, having the best that Missouri can have, so for the kids.
And I actually think we agree on a lot of the outcomes. You know, this is more specifically around being active participants, really understanding civic engagement, having some common knowledge that we can count on, so that people, no matter where they happen to have been born, within this state or within the states, know a certain core body of knowledge. I think we all really respect that. All right, I'm gonna go, if Nancy Shatter, the note taker, comes back, okay, she's gonna be bringing me a sandwich. I'm gonna go over to Desi right now and get another notepad.
Great, I'm sure we'll need it.
Okay. Oh,
Everything working?
Yeah, I think so. Okay, if you know the password better than I do. I just realized I had gotten involved in notes and I failed to do my job here. Can I help?